In the 18th century, when a slave owner or when there are runaways, the slave owner can ask, because he is paying tax, ask the state to pay him, to reimburse because he has lost a slave, to repair the fact that he has lost a slave. So reparation started like, so which means that the slave is a property. He's a property. The slave belongs to the owner. He can sell him. So bear in mind that we are asking reparation to Europeans or to Western countries. We are asking them to repair. But I have to remind you that this term was used during slavery by the slave owners asking the state, so because he is a property, you pay and you get him back. So as your question, when we use the term reparation to Western countries, are we selling our former relatives? Are we selling them? Moral issue, I don't know. Okay, I have seen a cross here. This term also, let me bifurcate. This term also is a kind of, religious term. Because in the Bible, when you make a fault, you can repair it by, like a repentance, by telling the truth that you have made a mistake. So if there is a mistake that we want to repair, the first thing to do for us is to understand the slaves were people who were dehumanized. They were dehumanized. They were like objects. So what kind of reparation do we need? Do we need a reparation taking them like objects or selling them? Or do we need a reparation where we need them to be human like us? You understand me? I don't know whether I get myself clear here. If we want their humanity back, if we want them to be human, what kind of reparation we need? Is it the slave owner reparation? Remember, last January the 1st, we have the independence, the celebration of the independence of Haiti. Haiti, because they took independence, Napoleon. So now I'm coming to an issue. This man, who does it belong, the Gambians or the Senegalese? The question is here. When we ask the return of artifacts from the Europeans, sometimes they use that artifacts for ethnology matters. Those masks divide us. They define who we are, and they take them to represent us. So the issue here, if you bring that mask has no soul for the Jola or for the Gambian Jolas. You know what I mean? For the Gambian, they are all Muslim. Why should you bring a mask of initiation for the old parents, for the Gambian, for who? What should we repatriate? Should we repatriate something from the Europeans because it belongs to our ancestors, while we know that it was used for ethnicization, the division of the different groups? So, an issue of the meaning of a museum in Africa, Hasum. I can ask you a question. I used to see the statue of Yame. What is the statue of Yame, for example, in the Gambia? So before going to ask the European, this is also a matter of repatriation, conservation. So does Yame belong to our history, or less belong to our history than our ancestors, or the mass that divide us? Those are the questions of return, repatriation, and conservation. We have to ask that. We are in a space, intellectual space. Those questions must be asked, So, the museum in Africa, and I love something you wrote in 2007, and now I'm bringing the Creole. The Creole in our areas, because you have them in Caraban. Caraban was a freedom village, like Janjanbureh, like Libreville, like Freetown, you see? So what the Creole means for us, we have to learn from them when we talk about repatriation, return. So if we ask something from the Europeans to pay us back, who should ask for responsibility? Should we take that money and give it to the Creole? So that's a good question. So, that money we are going to ask to the Europeans, should we take it, okay, give it to the Creole? I don't know. But let's learn what they did. Did they complain about their situation, or how from suffering they became someone else? This is also what we have. You defended that in 2007. This is also what we have about Haiti and South Africa. The Creole, South Africa and Haiti are our references. We have to learn from about repatriation, etc., etc. So it will become then, when we look at carefully to the Creole, South Africa, and Haiti, we will talk about repatriation and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basen. Thank you for those, because this is a new dimension, with the meanings of certain words that we talk about, but he's going deep association with slavery. So because of time, I'm not going to attempt to, but I know reparation, that means injustice. Okay, and then reparation, you have to, yes, you have to do something wrong before you try to repair, and then repatriate, and dehumanization. I'm learning all these things, and I hope you are all learning. Please, the students, I would like all of us to be taking notes. To be taking notes. I would like to recognize the Commonwealth, Secretary General of this Commonwealth. She is here with us. We'd like to welcome her. And she's part of us. You are welcome home, Ma. And then we have the bishop, the Methodist Bishop, Manga, yeah, from that I can recognize. I know some of them. And I would like to recognize also our learned intellectual here with us. He could also be a panelist here, but he will maybe during the discussion, Dr. Cherno Omar Barry, who is now as the Senegalo-Gambian Secretariat. And we have Mr. Bajfai. Maybe I may not recognize all of you, but I recognize all of you here, and you are all welcome. You are all part of this. And maybe we'll be discussing, you see, we talked about Gore. That's what I'm saying in Gambia, it's Africans, Gore Island, you know, the Sinyaras. Mr. Hassan said, we talked about the Sinyaras. And here there is a song which the musicians, the choral players, they sing for the Sinyaras. They call them Janjanbureh Bicentenary. It's a very popular song, so that means that they existed here in Georgetown. I know that choral music, which talks about the Janjanbureh Bicentenary. So because we don't have much time, since we have started late, and we are going to leave room for discussions, I would like to call on the next scholar, who was, I should say, a director of the National Center for Arts and Culture, and my own brother, Dr. Balasaho, and maybe just a brief introduction for the time. Balasaho is a historian of the 19th and 20th century of West Africa. He's talking about religious, legal, cultural, and social, women, and gender history, which is very important to me when you talk about women. There's not much history written about women, but he took a very good dimension for which I myself have worked on a lot. The Kanyele women, we call them locally, the barren women, women who do not have children, how they are treated in Senegambia region. So, and then he worked on courts, Muslim courts, contours of change. And he worked on the Islamic society in colonial battles, the Gambia. Like I said, he also explored the place of women in the formation of colonial battles, the evolution of women's understanding of the importance of law in securing their rights, and as well as in which women utilize the new court system to fight for growing rights within the domestic sphere. He is currently writing a book entitled Ritualizing the Womb. That is the Kanyele woman I was talking about, the peril of childlessness, women in the Gambia. It investigates how voluntary associations of childless women shape perceptions of infertility in modern Gambia, and how the Kanyele encounter the burden of childlessness and redefine the cultural construction of womanhood. Before coming to Oklahoma University, like I said, Saho worked in the Gambia as the Director General of the National Center for Arts and Culture and the Director of the Oral History Archives. Dr. Saho, you're welcome.
I really would like to thank all of you for coming. I want to especially thank the Tourism Ministry, the NCAC, the Honorable Minister, my brother, the organizer for making me a part of this desirable gathering to celebrate and to reflect on the history and development of Makati Island. Colleagues and friends, attendees, I think this occasion is really surreal for me. I am a product of this school, and I have been on this stage several while I was here, I was not really good in sports. So what I used to do was every Saturday night or every other Saturday night, I would memorize Kwame Nkrumah's book called Voice from Conakry. And every Saturday night, I'll just stand on stage and behave like Kwame Nkrumah and talk about, right, sort of, you know, focus on our Africanness and of Africanity. So this is really important for me. As an African history professor, and one who spent his whole life working for the Ministry of Tourism and Culture, the development of this industry has always been at the center of my worldview. I always want to see a thriving tourism industry that can continuously add to the development equation of our beautiful country. But also, I have taken many study abroad trips with students from the US to the East and Southern African coast, where I saw examples of thriving tourism projects. So for me, it is really important that this industry survives, and it survives in very meaningful ways. So for me then, the question really is how and in what ways can we do to take advantage of the histories that my colleagues have narrated here, and the cultures of this Georgetown and the surrounding communities to fashion the island, to fashion this island as the Zanzibar of Kenya, for example, or the Mombasa of Tanzania. In other words, how can we take advantage of Janjanbureh and its location to make it or turn it as a gem of tourism in the Gambia, and as a destination where every tourist, visitor, or student must visit? Is it possible, for example, along with the stone circles and our ancient histories, to retrace and rebuild these rich histories into a gemstone that would amaze the world and make the Gambia a must-visit? How can we create sustainable tourism in the Gambia? So I have so many examples. Like, to me, the potentials and opportunities to fashion Janjanbureh as a must destination are many. But I will only talk about a few examples because of time. So the first way that I think that we can make this place the center of tourism is to think about how to really fashion Janjanbureh by rebuilding or recreating, for example, some of the old colonial structures we found on this island. For example, the mud hut, which was called Fort George, that was built in the middle of the island, which gave rise to the settlement's name of Georgetown. Can we also rebuild the small fort, cannons, and the British flag that was called Fort Campbell, that was constructed at the shortest crossing point of the island? I think that must be towards Tabanani. Also, when the soldiers arrived here in 1823, they found a settlement called Morokunda, which can be called the home of scholars, populated by some 200 Muslims seeking refuge from persecution by local kings. Why can't we develop these ruins and turn them into museums and guest houses? Second is to tie the island and its history of slavery to the history of a now abandoned village settlement known as Jonkakunda on the Lamenkoto side of the river. You can see it. If you stand by the river and look towards your left, you will see a lot of baobab trees. And that village, Gambia, in the late 1770s, as my colleague mentioned, this English-Scottish explorer Mungo Park spoke of a thriving slave industry in this town. And many years ago, I used to work at the NCAC. We have done numerous interviews here in Makati and the surrounding villages on slavery. And the name Jonkakunda was brought up many times during those interviews. As we all know, though slavery was abolished in around 1808, the international trade and even the internal trade continued well into the 19th century. In fact, some historians believe that the famous Barra War of 18 a result of the continuation of the slave trade. So why can't we rebuild these villages and sites to tell our own version of slavery and the slave trade as a way to draw in Africans in the diaspora and those interested in the general history of slavery and the slave trade? My third point, and most importantly, is to exploit the river by centering Georgetown. To me, the river offers us the best and richest natural products to market the Gambia as a destination. No river in the world, and let me repeat that, no river in the world has 6 tributaries or junctions or intersections populated by hippos, right? Also, there are only 2 countries in the world divided by a river, and the Gambia is one of the 2. Brothers and sisters, is this not remarkable? Imagine we craft stories around this unique opportunity, the bird species, the flora and fauna, to enhance ecotourism. My fourth point, as I have just mentioned, is to center the history of the Seninke Marabu Wars. These are conflicts waged by militant Islamic clerics to Islamicized region, as my colleague just mentioned, people who attempted to build, who followed the traditional religious practices, and leaders who are Muslim reformists. Among the major causes of resentment of the militant Muslim leaders towards the Soninke was their overlordship that forced the former to pay taxes. I strongly believe that adding the story of people like Musa Molo Balde and Keser Kunda, and as well as the stories of other jihadists like Maba Jahu Fodekaba, etc., could provide a rich history and enrich experience for visitors to this island, and as well as for students. Finally, we Gambians have something special that can make the relationship between visitors and locals very cordial, pleasant, and enriching. And guess what is that? And that is trust. Because historically, historically, Gambians are one of the most trusted people in the world. So you can ask me how, right? For example, during the infamous Atlantic slave trade that my colleagues talked about, barracoons, I don't know if we know barracoons, but barracoons are slave-holding shelters. Barracoons were built in several parts along the African shores, particularly West African shores, to hold slaves for weeks and months before the arrival of slave ships. However, have any of us ever seen a remain, a picture or drawing of a barracoon along the Gambia River? I have never seen one. Have you ever not seen it? Have you guys seen it before? You know a barracoon, right? Do you know why we have not? It's because of trust, and I want to explain how. Do you know, during this shameful trade that our brothers talked about, they have developed a system of transaction based on trust. Thus, local slave merchants and traders, in the absence of slave ships at slave ports, would distribute the captives, like if, like they go in chains all around, right? And they will be these captives would be distributed to families along the Gambia River. These captives would temporarily assist their new families in agricultural work and household chores. In that way, the merchants would absolve themselves from feeding the captives during these periods, or in the absence of slave ships. Imagine if you have a barracoon and you tie all your slaves, you would have to feed them. If they are sick, you will have to help them. But by distributing them to families, absolve you from all of the responsibility. But the interesting part is that as soon as the slave ships arrive, these traders would go to the families and collect their so-called goods for the onward middle passage. And this has been described very well in historical books. In fact, say Mungo Park really talked about this, and he gave a lot of very good examples where he went with these slave coffles for these slave traders to collect their people from families. He described very fascinating stories about this type of relationship. However, as I said, as soon as slave ships arrived, the traders would go to the families and collect their so-called goods for the onward middle passage. So can you imagine, even these horrendous transactions, Gambians still trust each other. Remember, this is during the slave trade. I can seize your slaves. But when you come, they'll say, oh, here is your good. I think that, and I believe that trust we need to sustain tourism in the Gambia. I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Balasaho. I think he has just touched on one of the criteria and one of the reasons why we are having this festival. And then what do we want to do? The way forward for this festival is to have Janjanbureh as a tourism hub, to develop and really look at our sectors, our historical sites, to develop them, and then Janjanbureh would be one of the main areas to develop tourism in the Gambia. So I think it is one of the main objectives of this festival, which he has touched on. Like I said, we believe everything. I hope you are all taking notes, the students. So one more round of applause. Now we go on to my brother. My dear brother, he's a Creole. That's the thing about Gambia. We are all one family. He's a Creole, I'm a Mandinka, but we grew up in the same neighborhood. He's my brother, my very good brother. Nana Gray Johnson. Okay, I'll just give you a brief synopsis of Nana. Nana was a cabinet minister, Minister of Information at one time. But before then, let me give you his credentials. He holds a master's degree in journalism from Stanford University and a bachelor's honors in mass communication from Lewis and Clark College, 1978, both in the USA. He specializes in news writing and editing skills. He used to blaze trails in the Gambia and Europe, London in the UK in particular. Over the last 45 years of work, from editor of the Gambia News Bulletin in Banjul since 1979. He holds so many certificates, and he has been lecturing in Management Development Institute of the Gambia. And then he has a vast experience of editing international and local newspapers and magazines. He was the assistant editor of the New African London, UK, 1981, and he was even a proprietor and managing editor of a magazine known as the Topic magazine. His manuscript of the Creole people of the Gambia, an anthropological research study supported by the University of the Gambia, awaits publication. Now he will tell us whether it has been. Of Kairaba, the bestseller autobiography of Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara, founding dean of the School of Journalism, and I know it's finishing, and digital media of the University of the Gambia, and founding serving chairman of the Media Council of the Gambia. So we really have some good scholars here.
Good evening, everybody. We'll go straight to the meat of the matter. The night is fast spent. Oh, you are not hearing me well. All right, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President of the Gambia Writers Association. Well, it was while the government of the Gambia was rolling out a pilot health revolving fund scheme some 30 years ago that I needed to see a doctor at the Royal Victoria Hospital. I had taken an awkward fall while running around in my backyard, and the soreness in my right elbow was getting steadily worse. So I queued up like a good citizen at the front desk and handed a piece of paper bearing my name on it to a young lady. I also handed her a $5 currency note to have her register me to see the doctor. Looking up admonishingly, she said to me, "You must pay $10. And I said, "Why?" And she replied, $5 is for Gambians. Well, you can imagine how miffed I was. At $10 is for Gambians. So a desk clerk had instantaneously tagged me as a foreigner. To her, there could be nothing Gambian in the name Nana Gray Johnson. Was a desk clerk fresh from high school to blame? Whose fault was it that a civil servant who did not know the first thing about the anthropology of a tiny minority of Creole stroke Oku Marabu people of her country would be yoked to the responsibility of a registrar on a national scheme that involved determining nationality by names and last names? Was it her fault or that of the education system that did not prepare her with information on the Gambia's experience over 400 years? 127 of it under the direct British watch that had left debris of hyphenated English-sounding surnames such as Gray Johnson, Downs Thomas, Buxton Wright, or of Yoruba and Gold Coaster first names such as Nana, Erubami, Babatunde, and Bami Joko. So those were as Gambian as that clerk's Jaju or Sane or Sise surnames that were not there in the new settlement named Bathurst when it was founded in 1816, and where the Register of Liberated African Slaves was opened on December 31st, 1831. It was former Jaju, Sane, Sise that were getting off those ships and coming back home. That was how in 1996 or thereabouts, the great-great-granddaughter of Jaju Sane Sise was questioning a great-grandson of William Johnson, an immigrant citizen who arrived with the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses that were yearning to breathe free of slavery, the wretched refuse returning to the shores of home in Bathurst. William married his dear wife, Hannah Johnson, and began raising a family to add to his honor of being appointed a messenger at the Secretariat under Lieutenant Governor George Rendell, who was establishing the Gambia Civil Service as soon as he arrived on duty in Bathurst in 1830. Okay, I'll come back in and hide my face from the crowd. So whose business was it to bring fresh education to everyone? How can I find common ground in the Gambia's in the 21st century? So what happened is we artists and griots and painters and writers and singers, it falls to us. And it falls to the business of government that when we create, they take it up. Because that is how we can together express who we are or what we should be in the 21st century. They call us Aku locally, and we became Creole. Aku was what became of the accuser's grandfather, after he had been taken from the banks of the River Gambia to Louisiana and brought back, perhaps via Freetown and maybe Liberia and onto Bathurst. That was how, for example, Pane became McDonald, Jallo became Mason, Jara became Owens, Jau became Roberts, Sambu became Foster, and Mane became Williams. Never forget how Kunta Kinte became Toby. So you see, this research document that the University of the Gambia supported said they would answer the question that that lady at the RVH asked me, or the accusation she made, I don't even know what to call it now, that Gambians should pay $5 is for Gambians. Well, I'm going to show her. How do I show her that I was more Gambian than she was? I wrote a book. And that book is called The Creole People of the Gambia. And it is now in manuscript form. It's all in here, waiting to be published, thanks to a research grant from the University of the Gambia. All right, so I'll fast forward because we have time. The crucial learning curve is that the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, the press, and the people, with this book, with this document in circulation, they will henceforth be guided by information and enlightenment towards inclusive designs and policies that will factor in their delivery only just considerations for all Gambians. By this narrative, we know New York was not the only melting pot on this side of the Mississippi. People came home and we have become citizens. And it is our bounden duty to read, mark, and learn and inwardly digest the record in this study in order to increase knowledge for many who will come to understand the journey of life of a small but vibrant minority. How does Georgetown come into the issue? Overconcentration, disease in Bathurst, which started in Freetown, congestion, and the agreement of 1831 to offload to Banjul, to Bathurst. And Bathurst became congested. And the names you have heard just now, the Pignards, the Joiners, had to come in and show their enterprise by providing the flotilla of canoes. And they say, well, there must be an agreement to halve at least the population of Bathurst. And then Georgetown was carved out of Janjanbureh to create this provincial settlement. And of course, it ties in. Georgetown, this river island, it's 158 miles, right? Correct me, 158 miles from Bathurst, was born out of the primary colonial interest in the need for planting of British authority in the hinterland. Establishing a Gambian protectorate to Captain Alexander Grant. That name has come up. He designed Bathurst, and you can see the way Fitzgerald and Cameroon Street and Buckle Street and Lemon Street, the way they were all laid out. You can see Jackson Street in Georgetown, and Brook Street and Malata Street and so forth and so street. And so if you came bright and yellow, you had land already. Okay? So the population started to increase. Who had fled hither for protection from the raging war in the neighboring countries? They talked about the jihads. You heard that. And Governor Macaulay of Sierra Leone, reported that many more merchants and inhabitants of Bathurst had requested
focus on climate change and climate justice. The Gambia understands the injustice of climate change. 1989 in Langkawi, when we together as a family of nations, well, that threat is here with us today. And when you're talking about reparations, one of the reparations in relation to climate change is loss and damage. And we fought for 20 9 years for loss and damage. And eventually at Sharm el-Sheikh, too, the world agreed on loss and damage after we in the Commonwealth in June had made it a central part of our communique at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Kigali, and it was a seminal moment. And this year, we have actually got a fund. And there's so much we in the Commonwealth are doing now on living lands to implement the 3 Rio Conventions, the creation of the Blue Charter to really face the work we need to do on oceans, the fact that we've created the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, that with just $7.8 million, we have been able to deliver $322 million into the hands of our member states, and we have $500 million in the pipeline. The work we need to do for the Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Transition, and so much. So why am I sharing this with you? It's because the Gambia is playing its part. The Gambia is leading on part of our digital work because we know that we are living in a technologically driven world. And we need to make sure that our young people play their part. So we have created an AI consortium to make sure that the Commonwealth, particularly the small, the vulnerable, and the developing countries, do not get left behind. And each and every one of you are part of our past, but much more importantly, you're part of our future. And so, as your Commonwealth Secretary General, I really want to thank Gambia and Gambians. Thank you for your fortitude. I want to thank you for your courage, your determination, your faith in this country, and your strength. I know that the most devastating and damaging experience that any human being can, but they didn't just survive, they thrived. And they thrived, enable me to come home and to say to you, thrive too. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know that I will have to speak tomorrow, but I hope that you will keep an interest in our Commonwealth, that you'll be proud of it, that you will go and look at all the things that we are doing to honor our history, our culture, that you will know that there is nothing we cannot do if we decide to work together. It was Madiba who said, "The impossible is always impossible until it's done." And if there's one thing those of us of African descent know, is that the impossible has always been, but necessary for us because we too must still survive. So thank you.
Thank you so much, the Right Honorable. And you can see, she said she's a Gambian. We should think about giving, yeah, I saw. Yeah, I have it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, you want to say something?
Yes, I agree. There are questions for you.
Yeah, she can sit. She's a Gambian, proudly Gambian, and we welcome you home. And then we have to think about it. And NCAC others, we should give her a Gambian name. Let us all think a fitting Gambian name, since she's a Gambian.
Yeah, we want to start giving the best.
What's the most popular Gambian name here? Is it Binta or Fatumata? Aisatu. What name? You can choose.
She knows about this already, so she can choose.
You were then vulnerable before the rise of Musa and his father. You were taken for slaves. Because you were isolated communities, it was easy to penetrate you. So we created that project, specially for the Fullers. We built houses. We made farms. From 1842, we were going down the nation states on the river from Barra. We went to Berending. We came to Combo. We visited the king there. We went and then to Mansa. We built the one at Fatoto. He said he did not know where Fort Campbell is. Fort Campbell is at the eastern end, sir. Yes, sir. Fort Campbell was there because it was built there. That's where we had our mission station there.
The right Reverend.
Right here. Yes.
Right Reverend, thank you. You see, I did not record because you know what happened to me? I was using my, no,